set the debate and how I saw it, the debate about multiculturalism, gender equality and women's rights. And this is going back like 10 years to 1999, where we had this debate about the alliance between multiculturalism and liberalism, and feminism actually. Will Kimmeke was very kind of optimistic about this alliance between multiculturalism and liberalism, both to protect international minorities, minority rights, but also he was also very optimistic in terms of feminism. But then I have pointed towards one of the theorists from the United States, and this the first slide is about the United States debate, so that we remind ourselves and remember. And Susan Moller-Oking, a political theorist, in 1999, set out the conflict between minorities, culture, religion and tradition, and women's rights. So this was a shock. It sent shock waves, you know, to both liberal, socialist and feminist. Should there and could there, and is this correct? Should there and is there, would there be, and does it have to be a conflict? And especially post-colonialists like Schachter were kind of very critical and said, yeah, well, it is not true this, you know, women should not be forced to choose between your culture and your rights. There should be a room for different cultures, and different women of different cultures should be working together. So, and then this criticism was very strong in the United States, and Oking kind of retreated somewhat, said, no, I didn't mean that. What I meant was really, and this is what I think we can agree upon, most of us, that consulting with women is essential, and that female members of all minority groups, and we're talking about, it could be indigenous groups and aboriginals, it could also be French Canadians and different, it could be Roma, it could be Samis in the Nordic countries, should be represented in any negotiations about minority groups' rights. So this is democracy, this is justice, and this is feminism, I guess. So, but this debate, which didn't about 1999, multiculturalism didn't even come to the Nordic countries yet, so we didn't have any debates about that. And this is Anne Phillips who tried to kind of smooth the waters, saying, no, there's no fundamental contrast between the different equality claims, sex equality and religious rights. You know, you have to negotiate them in different contexts, in different countries, taking into account history and institutions. So, I think this the first point is then that this political and academic debate opened the floor for discussion of different models of diversity and gender equality. And, you know, you can see from the inside that Oking's model, in a way, we see was a kind of unitary approach, where gender became the primary, or as the Germans would say, the master category, as the most important category to focus on. And we can also see that Kimmeke in that debate had a kind of more multiple approach. He focused on many ethno-national and ethno-cultural diversities and minority rights. It could be French-Canadian, it could be Aboriginals in Canada. But where was gender? Gender was absent. So we have these two, in a way, two bodies of literature, gender research with gender as this primary category, and then migration, multiculturalism, where minorities or ethno-national minorities, ethnicity was the focus, but no gender. So you have these two bodies of literature, and then another multiple approach that Phillips, which tries to include gender, yeah. So. And then we have in the debate about intersectionality, we can discuss and we can distinguish between unitary, multiple and intersectional models. And I'll come back to that later. And Joel Davis, who was here, kind of tried to have a dual perspective, saying that we both need intersectional models, but we also need multi-layered model or multi-dimensional model, which takes into account that we live in nation states, but we are also part of Europe, we are part of a global reality. So, in that sense, this was setting the debate, and now I'm moving to the Nordic welfare states. And this is first also a little history that it was a Norwegian, I think, scholar who said the Nordic welfare states had this passion for equality. And it's in the Nordic societies are seen as imagined communities. I mean, what is the national imagination? It's we value, we cherish democracy, equality, and solidarity as rhetoric, as very strong norms, also as policies. So this means that social equality and gender equality principles have become important part of Nordic national belongings, as self-understanding as what it is to be Nordic. It is to be democratic, gender equal, and also going for social equality. So we can discuss afterwards what distinguishes the Nordic countries from other European countries. So there were also at the same time, this is around 2000, 1999, critical theories, post-structuralism, post-colonialism, post-nationalism, but they were very kind of minority criticisms. So, and then the latest intersectionality was a kind of way to focus on more multiple inequalities and seeing that gender didn't have to be the primary category. So, that during the last 10 years, there have come new research, and one of the ones that I'm very inspired by is Grete Brockmann and Annika Hagelund, and they have written a book together with other scholars from Denmark, from Norway, from Sweden, where they labeled it the limits to welfare. So this was a critical perspective on Nordic welfare and democracies, and what was really good was that there were historians, sociologists, political scientists, and so it was a historical kind of. So, but the gender research first, little history, 1999, Christina Bergqvist and others, it was a whole group of feminist scholars gave up this book about equal democracies, ? And there they conclude there's one Nordic welfare and equality model with 5 different equality profiles. So there are differences, and those differences are also important. So it depends on whether you look at the Nordic countries from the inside. From inside the Nordic countries, we all look very different. We look different, but from the outside, I think that you see the similarities. So they try to conceptualize that with one model with 5 profiles, gender profiles, equality profiles, or 5 exceptions, you could also say that. So, if you look at equalities and differences in the big picture, now it's a big picture, you know, you can go down and focus, but the big picture, I think, there is that it is similar welfare and gender models, and this is the interesting conclusion in that book, that I agree totally, but I didn't do all the research, I haven't done the historical studies, but you could see from political studies of politics that there are different approaches to multiculturalism, immigration, and integration. Very different. And I have this Norwegian colleague, Annika Hagelund, was just in Aalborg, and she talked about the good, the bad, and the in-between. And this is, the good is Sweden. Sweden is the most multicultural, you know, they understood themselves as being very good multicultural societies. Denmark was the bad one because since 2001, between 2001 and 2011, Denmark had a liberal conservative government which was supported by the radical right, the Danish People's Party. So we were the bad one. We did restrictive immigration and integration policies. The 24-year rule and so on. I have written about that. I don't have time to go into that. And Norway was the in-between. You know, sometimes it was inspired by some of Swedish policies and sometimes by Danish policies and so on. So, but the interesting thing is welfare and gender, many equalities, but multiculturalism and immigration, integration, very different policies. So this is very puzzling, in a way very puzzling. So the paradox which scholars have put up is that in spite of these differences, and maybe it shouldn't come as a surprise to sociologists, I don't know, but in spite of these differences in policies and in discourses in the three countries, there's a trend towards practical convergence. And this practical convergence in terms of integration, migration is failed integration in all the 5 Nordic countries. And they are, and how can we say that? The indicator is high unemployment. If the native population have about, at the moment, 5, 6, 7, you know, immigrant groups can have up to 20, 25% unemployment. So there's a gap in integration on the labor market between native and immigrant groups. So this is one of the indicators that they point towards with this failed integration. So, and I must also say that I'm not going into statistics here because that would bore you, but Sweden is also the country which has 20% of immigrants, Denmark and Norway around 10, Finland is small with less than 5%. So there are also differences in terms of who and how many. So, differences in welfare and equality policies and discourses, but practical conversions. Differences in integration and migration policies and practical convergence. So, if we then combine the two bodies of research that we know of, gender research on the one hand, that I've been part of the last 20, 30 years, and then migration research, this Grete Brockmann and Annika Hagelund, the limits to welfare, is very much migration research. They don't do gender. So it's two bodies of research. Then you can see that there's a practical convergence also in the sense that you see successful integration of women in terms of the labor market, in terms of politics, in terms of many of the indicators that you would like to, also in terms of equality, and we have maternity, paternity leave, I'll come back to that, daddy quotas, and so on. But failed integration of immigrants in the Nordic countries. So this is another of the paradoxes. You have, if you look at women, oh, things are going well. If you look at migrants, not going so well. So this is a paradox. And I must say, I'm still puzzled about that. It's some of the puzzles, and you know, how to understand that. Okay, so now I'll come back to that, but I don't think it's easy to understand. So now I'll move to gender research done. How have they analyzed Nordic welfare and gender regimes, or gender order, as Ilse would say. It was Helga Maria Hernes who already back in 1987 coined this state feminism. Since then, Nordic state feminism, since then it has become very popular. You have state feminism in all countries in Europe, but actually the way she used it was interaction between state institutions and women's organizations. Not only state feminism from above, where in many countries they talk about state feminism in China now, but this is very much from above. In some countries, it's state policies from above. She talked about the interaction between state institutions, policies, and women's organizations. So it was very much a combination of from above and from below. And I think this is what has characterized very much Nordic countries, that we have had this interrelation. The French love the state. I hope there's not so many French here. And maybe Germans also love the state more. And some people, the liberals, they love civil society. Nordic countries, we try to balance between civil society, organizations, and the state. And then the other concept that Helga Marie had is already in 1987 called these women-friendly social policies. So this is another characteristic, I think, a specific characteristic of Nordic countries that, you know, we have called this, what are women-friendly social policies? They should address, or they address, childcare, elderly care, and health care. I mean, and also care for the handicapped and so on. So this is what has been characterized as women-friendly social policies, and I have a quote about that. And the big question is, of course, whether these women-friendly social policies, are they directed towards all women? Who benefit from them? Migrant women, are they still women-friendly? And how do you, I mean, really the big question is how you link social policies, welfare policies, and migration policies. Two bodies of policies. Is migration and integration policies, is that not part of social policy? So these policies are not linked, they're separate bodies and so on. So, gender equality policies, I need to say that in the Nordic countries, they're also different. They're very narrow definitions. This would be Denmark. And broader definitions, this would be Norway, where they have daddy quotas for 1 month, they have quotas in politics, they have quotas, even 40% of quotas in private corporate business. So, I mean, Norway is, in that sense, the model with very broad definitions of gender equality policies. In Denmark, it has been relatively narrow. For us, gender equality policies is different from welfare policies. Welfare policies is not. It's not motivated by gender equality concerns, it's motivated by social concerns for the children and the elderly and so on. So, and then of course, with the liberal conservative government, now we change government, now we have a social democratic, social radical, socialist Folks Party, also free coalition, but with the old government, their gender equality, the rhetoric was that gender equality has been achieved for the native population. We don't need to do anything more, it's achieved. But for minority groups, for migrant groups, there we have to give money, they have to learn democracy, they have to be integrated on the labor market. So gender equality policies became directed in those 10 years of the radical right supporting the government solely and primarily towards minority women. So this was a very narrow thinking. So Gender Plus, I will introduce that because this has become actually also a catchword, not only an academic, but also the Norwegian government has set down a commission to study this Gender Plus, to study how gender intersects with ethnicity, class, and life course. So this is their version of Gender Plus, of Gender Plus. Okay, so here, just for the history of it, I have this quote, the classical quote from 1987. Women-friendly state would not force harder choices on women than on men, or permit unjust treatment on the basis of sex. In a women-friendly state, women will continue to have children, then there will be other roads to self-realization open to them. In such a state, women would not have to choose futures that demand greater sacrifices from them than are expected by men. And I must say that she didn't say the Nordic countries were kind of these women-friendly. She said they had potential to become women-friendly because of these social policies. But she also said, and we all forgot that, or it wasn't in the middle of the 80s, it wasn't something on the agenda. It would be, in short, a state where injustice on the basis of gender would be largely eliminated without the increase of other forms of inequality, such as among groups of women. And I think this has been what we have been seeing with increased migration, that inequalities among women in the Nordic welfare states have been increasing. This is very much. So, we can say maybe that there is a kind of gender equality paradox. There is a gap between the promise of including women, not only on the labor market, but also in the core political institutions. And there is inclusion of women from ethnic majority backgrounds, which contrasts with exclusion of women from ethnic minority backgrounds in core political institutions, in parliament and government, and on the labor market. I started out with the labor market. And then there is a trend towards dividing the public agenda in two concerns. One is for the majority, and the other is for the minority. And the minority have to be taught democracy, had to be integrated on the labor market. And one of the problems in Denmark, first, it was visible that the minority agenda has been influenced by the radical right's rhetoric and their recent use and also misuse of gender equality concerns towards the other. So, and I think this is not only Denmark at the moment. In the Nordic countries, actually Norway had a very strong populist right party, actually with more votes, more than 20% of the votes than Denmark. But the difference between Denmark and Norway was that in Norway, it hasn't had any influence on policies yet. And now we have the Swedish Democrats and we have the two Finns. So the challenge from the radical right and the way the radical right uses gender equality concerns towards the minorities who are patriarchal, they oppress their women and so on. So this is the rhetoric, and to that extent, so gender equality has become contested in that. What do we mean by it to that? So this is kind of setting the scene. So, I think I'll go fast with that. So, the conclusion is that both limits and potentials. I would like to stress that there are contradictions. I think we need to look at the contradictions, and the British did that very well with capitalism. So, the problem, I think the limits to state feminism in the Nordic context is that we need to rethink gender equality agenda. We need to include the voices and demands of all groups of women in formulation of policy. This is about priorities. What is more important? Is it to include women in top positions in private corporations? Or is it violence against women, or is it domestic violence? I mean, these kind of priorities, we have to discuss that democratically, you know, who represents, who has the power to represent women. So, a gender equality agenda need to include the voices and demands of all groups of women. And so I think there is a trend towards welfare nationalism in the Nordic countries, and actually it's not only me. I have this study by Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish scholars, historians, and this is, we have social equality for natives, for Danes, for Swedes, for Finns, closing the borders, the trend to close borders, who has access to the country? We like this big social equality, gender equality, but only for people who, are native, who live in the country, who have citizenship. So I think that this is an illustration of what I would call, and they call also welfare nationalism, which has restrictive immigration and integration laws, which construct this dualism between us and them, us the majority, them the minority, and between citizens and non-citizens. So it's all about migration and moving across, So the limitations to state feminism, I think, is nationalism, it's right-wing populism, it's misuse of gender equality as a weapon against the patriarchal culture of ethnic minorities. And there are patriarchal cultures, of course, but they're also among the majority. It's not kind of only the others. So these were the limits. We also need to look at the potentials. So I try to do that kind of contradictions, to look at the contradictions, potentials for inclusive Nordic equality policy. I think we have a tradition for equality, and I wouldn't say a passion, but the norm. So inclusive participation of all marginalized groups and political concerns for multidimensional inequality. I think this is a potential we have. Since we are so happy for social equality, you can see OECD indicators. It has been growing inequalities in all the Nordic countries in the last 10 years, but it has so in all of the European countries. But I think there is a potential for inclusive participation. Usually I have done a study with Hege Skeie, who is a Norwegian colleague from Oslo, where we compare Danish and Norwegian debates. So we use the example of the Norwegian ombudsman as an example of a kind of intersectional rhetoric or argument who links concern for religious minorities with concern for gender equality. So it's possible to link that, and we have the Ombudsman's institution, and actually they did that in 2005, say it's Muslim women who wear the hijab for religious reasons, so they shouldn't ban the veil or the hijab in private companies. In that sense, linking the two principles, ethno-religious equality or freedom and indirect gender equality. So there are some concerns. So I think the potentials is a strong tradition for social and gender equality, and also for women-friendly in this, but I mean social qualities in terms of childcare, elderly care, health care, they're important. I think they have, and disability, they have been important for women. And I think the last thing, because I'm also a study of democracy, I think that this tradition we have, the key role for women's organizations and for grassroots activism, actually from democracy from below and for organizing, influencing politics from below, I think this is a very good potential. And I think even the right wing, which gave lots of money to, teaching migrant women democracy in the local area, so there were lots of money for that. And I think even that can be turned around, because women, I mean, in local women's groups, all in Aalborg, Aarhus, in localities in Copenhagen, are organizing and are getting empowered through this kind of organizing and are demanding their rights, are claiming. So I think that this is the potential that can turn around. Okay, how much time do I have? Actually, they said to a committee who was headed by my friend Hege Skeie and 12 researchers. They said, the integration and equality minister said, you have to investigate what has happened to gender equality policy in Norway the last 25 years, since the middle of the 80s. You have to look at gender equality policies in terms of class, gender, ethnicity, but also life course. So, I think this is a very illustrative example of some of the potentials. And also the failures in a way, because they say that this gender equality policy has failed. Because why has it failed? Because it has favored the middle classes. not unskilled women, not ethnic minority women. So this, but I think this illustrates some of the self-criticism, some of the self-reflectiveness, both from researchers and also for politicians. So this is a good example of some of the potentials. Yeah, I will move now to the last point, because I think this takes too long. Yeah, my last point would be about the challenge to move beyond the welfare, beyond the nation state, and I think the Nordic kind of example can illustrate that. Even in the good social gender equality, women-friendly, state feminist Nordic, it doesn't work if you shut the borders. It doesn't work if it's only solidarity among people from your own, from the nation state. So I think the challenge is to move beyond the nation state, and I just have an example from a good friend that Ilse mentioned, Yuval Davis, who talks about this multi-layered citizenship approach, where people are not only connected to the nation state, but to more than one community, and talks about politics of belonging, which are political projects on different levels. It's about the nation state. Where do we belong? How do we define what is important, the values, the norms of being German, Leitkultur maybe here? What is that? And how the emotions, the politics of belonging of different groups, political parties, social movements, the women's movement, and also emotional attachment of us as individuals. And I would say that this intersectional perspective, this addresses how gender intersects with other kinds of differences and inequalities. And I actually find it very promising as a tool to analyze different kinds of inequalities. And this is my last point now, if I can, yeah. So, the last point is, I think that there is a post-national challenge today in Europe. We have the crisis, we don't talk about that now, to rethink social justice. And actually the argument here I've been trying to make is that the turn to diversity can open, and a sensibility towards migration and ethnic minorities can open new possibility to rethink theories, concepts and models, both within and beyond the nation state. And we need both. We need both to rethink within and beyond. So I think I have pointed at both potentials and also problems to negotiate gender with diversity in the context of multiple inequalities. There are some potentials, there are also some problems. There could be dialogues, but there can be conflicts, and there can be cooperation and conflicts. So I've tried to show that the Scandinavian welfare states and welfare nationalism face both problems and potentials to overcome, to accommodate diversity, multiculturalism and migration. I didn't give you the example with the hijab, only a little bit, can't go into that. So, what I would say that the post-national approach would negotiate equality with diversity in the context of multi-level and transnational governance, both European and global. Thank you very much for your attention.